So this account says the common IWC member is mentally ill. Forgiveness and love is a foreign concept to this community. That sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? For those of us here in the comic scene, that kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? They're fueled by hatred, mostly hatred of themselves. They exist to bring misery to the world, and when there is no more misery to bring into the world, they lose all direction in life. They cannot fathom disagreement or the idea of possessing a unique or individual opinion. Yeah, this is very familiar for a lot of us. They're fat, pathetic, smelly losers who have been so engulfed with the aroma of their own smegma, I don't know what that is, that they cannot discern the scent anymore. Something nasty. They live off high to high, mainly from being heard and seen, quote unquote, on X and gooning to copious amounts of anime porn. Yikes. Most of the IWC are foreigners whose voices alone are enough to invoke deep laughter from their audience. They shun themselves at the thought of interacting with real human beings, yet don't spend the time leaving their basement to go wipe their own asses after doing so. They're allergic to hygiene and the outdoors. They worship no god, but have made their favorite wrestlers and celebrities their own gods. The IWC are the future residents of mental asylums when they're finally reopened. Now, again, why am I reading that? This happened. So it says Rhea Ripley, Becky Lynch, Paul Heyman, and the New Day refused to be a part of WWE's 10 bell salute to Hulk Hogan. And I read that and I'm like, okay. Oh, wait, before I read that, so Mazepana has a clarification. He says, smegma is like wet, nasty gunk on genitalia, I think. I used to live with med school students. I promise that's the only reason I know that. I believe you. I believe you. Trust me, I do. I absolutely believe you. I stopped following wrestling. After the Ruthless Aggression was midway, I kind of dipped out of wrestling. By that point, it started to get stale. The WCW was pretty much dead, and WWE kind of buried a lot of the WCW wrestlers. So I was like, yeah, fuck this, I'm out. But when I started to like watch it a little bit again last year, right around before when Cody Rhodes won the WWE title from Roman Reigns at WrestleMania, and that was a pretty, it was entertaining WrestleMania. But I had noticed the wrestling crowd seemed kind of different, and the environment seemed kind of different. It wasn't like the more rougher crowd that used to be around during the Attitude Era of wrestling, and I started to notice certain things like they seemed to be a bit softer. The wrestlers kind of seemed very stale. Like there was no variety in the wrestlers. Like there was no like big guys. Like like back in the days, you had Earthquake, you had the Undertaker, you had Andre the Giant. There was Abdullah the Butcher, um, Kevin Nash, of course. There was no like big, large in life type of guys in wrestling. And that whole comic book feel, and again, it ties back to the comic stuff. The whole comic book feel of watching wrestling, where you watch the good guys versus the bad guys, and there's like all kinds of weird but interesting gimmicks. Back back going back to the Attitude Era, where you had Kane with the mask, you had Hurricane Helms. The Rock was a nice comedic comic book type character. Stone Cold Steve Austin. Even in WCW, you had Sting with the crow mask on, the crow paint, I should say. Hollywood Hogan. Rey Mysterio with the mask, like the luchadors. Like there was a lot of like variety and a lot of like visual comic booky style characters that made watching wrestling like it was like its own soap opera. You had the acrobatics, you had the skills and the storylines. It was just a nice combination of all of it that came together to make it must see TV. I found a lot of that missing when I watched what I saw last year in the WWE, and I kind of started following it from like the sidelines, like through posts and through what other people were saying. And I noticed that there was a lot less, obviously it was a lot less risque than the Attitude Era and even the Ruthless Aggression era. It seemed to be safer, softer, and I couldn't put my finger on it, like why it just felt weird. Well, with Hulk Hogan's death, it was made clear to me why it felt weird. It reminds me of what the comic industry was and what it still is today. Full of social justice warriors, full of atheistic, immoral, cold-hearted people who hate people that think differently from them, who hate diversity, who hate diversity of thought, diversity of opinion, who are very soft and are quick to cancel you and in some cases end your life if you say something that they deem offensive. And we've all heard over and over what Hulk Hogan did. We heard it over and over. We get it. It's yeah, okay, fine. He said a bad word, okay? Who hasn't said a bad word? And you know what bad word I'm talking about. For sake of YouTube, I can't say it, but you know what the bad word is. I will go if I had the ability to go back into anybody's life and review everything they've ever said in their life, I will find something similar that they have said. Nobody gets to judge anybody because you said a mean word. And again, you know what that mean word is. Wrestling is really SJW infested, says Helmut. Yeah, Helmut's been one kind of educate me on the IWC because he's been following wrestling still. Like I've been out of it, but he's been following it. So he's been kind of educating me because I had no clue what the IWC was until after Hogan died. And people were telling me, oh, this is the internet wrestling community. And I was like, oh, okay. And they were filling me in on details. And I'm like, oh, wow. These sound like the SJWs in comics and entertainment. Holy crap. It's the same kind of crowd. The same kind of hateful crowd that will send you to your grave if they hate you enough. Like they did with Ed Piskor. They will judge you for one thing that they deem offensive and will never let it go. You could apologize to these people 10 times over and they will never let it go. They will hold on to it and use it to manipulate any sentiment against you. That's what I've been seeing with regards to Hulk Hogan's legacy and memory. I've been seeing a move to tarnish his legacy, to memory hole it and erase it. And these are the current generation of wrestling fans who weren't even around during the Attitude Era or during the 80s when the wrestling boom really began. Like I was a child during the 80s and I saw, I witnessed Hogan's rise to the top. I saw the WWF and all the characters and the wrestlers that were there. I watched all the shows when it came on TV, going into the 90s when wrestling had a second boom with the Attitude Era. First with the WCW, Nitro, and the NWO, and then the WWF really amped things up with the Attitude Era with Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock and all those guys. Hogan was a big part of each era. Like he obviously was the guy in the 80s, and he was a main player in the 90s. And then during the Ruthless Aggression era in the mid-2000s, he helped do his part he took part in one of the most memorable WrestleMania events with The Rock in the mid-2000s. And it's undeniable. Listen, and I've been a Hulk Hogan critic. I have been a big Hogan critic back in the day with his locker room politics. And if you follow the antics, if you follow his time in WCW and some of the stuff that happened during the WWF in the 80s, Hogan had a reputation. I'm not going to say and tell you that he was a perfect guy or that he was this big saint who had everyone's best interest at heart. I'd be lying to if I said that. He clearly had his own motives. He had his own selfish motives. But at the same time, he had people that spoke well of him. And he was also very integral to the success of wrestling in the 80s and the 90s and in the mid-2000s. You cannot erase that. So, and, in his later years, yeah, some things happened and it was bad and people reacted. But, eventually he took ownership of it. He accepted his faith in Christ. And as far as we know, during his latter years, he's been an upstanding person. But none of that matters because if you say the bad word, the SJWs will hold it on you and will judge you and demand you die and burn in hell. This is how evil these people are, the IWC. They're extremely wicked, evil people. And I don't say it lightly. I don't say that lightly about people. But the things that I've been reading about what they're saying, they're absolutely evil and two-faced hypocrites. They want to talk about Hogan being racist, but you go into some of their timelines and the stuff they support is just as racist, if not more so. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've been to so many people's timelines and they're like supporting Black Lives Matter. I'm like, oh, so you support a terrorist organization, but you want to educate and critique on racism? You don't get to do that. You are a phony and a two-faced hypocrite. But this bothered me right here because people like Rhea Ripley, and I'm going to say something very controversial, but I defy you to prove me wrong. Okay? I'm going to say something very controversial. Rhea Ripley is a talented wrestler. She's got skills, but she's not the best female wrestler. I'm sure there's other wrestlers in the women's division that are better than her, but she's got skills. I'm not going to downplay her skills. But the only reason she's popular is because she's being fetishized. That's the only reason she's popular, because you got a bunch of beta males that are in love with her and are following her every move. That's why she's popular. And if you think I'm just making this up, you go to the X timelines, and not much talking about her skills as much as the stuff she does, like when she's twerking in the ring, or this close-ups on her body parts when she does certain moves. That's why she's popular, because she's being fetishized. And Becky Lynch got to where she's got because of nepotism. I think she's married to Seth Rollins. I believe. I think so. Yeah, it's Seth Rollins, right? Is Becky Lynch married to Seth Rollins? Yeah, that's Rhea Ripley. And to be fair, Angela, she looks a lot better without all that gunk on her face. She actually looks normal without that gunk. But she's also got a little musculature. So like beta males obviously are into that, and that's why she's popular. So yeah, the nose ring sucks too. Yeah, that again. I don't want to get too deep into that. I'm just making the point that the only reason she's got any kind of popularity is because beta males fetishize her. So she's not one to even critique on the legacy of Hulk Hogan. And these people need to thank their stars that someone like Hogan helped expand wrestling and make it break out of whatever it used to be back then, when it was just territories throughout the country. They owe their success to Hulk Hogan, because his character and his involvement during the 80s and the 90s made it the powerhouse that it became. He was completely instrumental. But yeah, so Rhea Ripley is not one to talk. She needs to know her place and have a seat. Same thing with Becky Lynch. Have a seat, Becky. Have a seat. You guys, your legacies will be a speck in the dust compared to someone like Hulk Hogan. And decades from now, we'll be talking about Hulk Hogan. We're going to talk about Stone Cold Steve Austin. We're going to talk about The Rock. We'll talk about China. We'll talk about Trish Stratus. We'll talk about Andre the Giant. We'll talk about Roddy Piper. We'll talk about Triple H. As much as I don't like Triple H, but he's still, to this day, still a name in the business. We'll talk about the Sting, the NWO. We'll talk about those guys, the Generation X, the Hardy Boys, the Dudley Boys. We're going to talk about all those people decades from now. We're not going to hear that much about people like Rhea Ripley or Becky Lynch. And on Paul Heyman, because he's on there too. Let's talk about Paul Heyman. If it wasn't for ECW, Heyman will be in the parking lot with Jim Cornette. Because he's another one that needs to know his place and have a seat. For him not to go out there and be a part of the salute to Hulk Hogan. Jim Cornette had his wrestlers in ECW wrestle and hurt themselves for free. They were getting hurt for free. They were breaking their bones and risking their bodies with no paychecks. People give Mike Awesome crap because he left ECW with the championship belt and signed with WCW. But number one, Paul gave him the okay. And two, Mike Awesome was wrestling his final shows, plural, in ECW for free. He wasn't getting a paycheck. And people gave him hell for that. And I'm like, and I know, granted, this stuff came out later on, but it's like when you find those out and you put it in perspective, it's like Mike Awesome did what anybody would have done, and he should have did it. And there's also like the stories about what happened with Chris Candido with Heyman, and I'm like, Paul needs to sit down. He needs to sit down. If it wasn't for Hulk Hogan, Paul would not be where he is today. I'm not saying that Hogan is directly responsible for Heyman's success at the time, but still, there is no wrestling as what it is without Hogan's involvement. These people owe him a debt. They need to all of them have to have a seat. Heyman's legacy is only because of ECW. Otherwise, no one would be talking about him. He'd be a speck in the dust. Just like Rhea Ripley, just like Becky Lynch. They need to know their roles, like The Rock said, know their roles and shut their mouths and pay your respects to a man that was important to the industry, that was instrumental in you getting your paychecks today. Absolutely disgusting, absolutely evil. 100%. Totally 100%. And Helmet, I agree with this statement 100%. She is a fetish object. And I'm going to piss off a lot of the Ripley simps. I don't care. I don't care. Know your place. Michael Brown cried, Hogan looked like he's thinking. What you say, bitch? And I felt a lot of these wrestlers are very overrated today. Like I see clips of like them doing these like weird acrobatics in the ring. They're doing these like what do they call it? The Cirque du Soleil stuff in the ring. And I'm like, that ain't wrestling. That's ballet. That's ridiculous. And it's skilled. It's skilled, but it's not wrestling. It's ridiculous. It looks way too choreographed, and it doesn't. It doesn't. It's embarrassing to the sports entertainment of wrestling. Helmet, I gave you the link. You should have been on the stream with me. He says ECW was for the most part absolute trash with drug addicted wrestling. I like ECW. ECW had some good wrestlers in it. It started off like when they started to break away from the NWA. You know, they still had Chris Benoit. They still had Dean Malenko, Rey Mysterio, Eddie Guerrero. Taz was just coming into his thing, as well as Sabu. So they had some good wrestlers. And then, you know, when most of those guys left to WCW, and then Chris Jericho followed too, they were still putting on some good wrestling and good storylines. Like they were still a good product. But yeah, towards the end, you know, shit started to unravel, and all that falls on Heyman's lap. Again, these people need to know their place. Yeah, I don't. Guy says I don't even watch current wrestling, and I see a ton of weird simping over Rhea. It's insanely, it's insane and I said weird, but it's obsessively weird. Like when she gets in the ring and the camera angles they focus on certain angles with her, and I'm like, that's how she got popular. She'll never have the level of success that Hogan had ever. And I go back to last year when that Liv Morgan clip became viral, when Dominic Mysterio, the son of Rey Mysterio, and Rhea were in the ring, and Liv is delivering that promo, and she says that, you know, and these are her words, not mine, that gorgeous men like Dominic don't find Rhea attractive. They find women like me, being Liv, attractive. And she turns around, does that twirl, and that clip went viral because she was speaking red pill. She was speaking truth to power in that one. That more men would tend to find Liv Morgan attractive than Rhea Ripley. That's just the reality, you know. Because Liv is a lot more natural looking than Rhea Ripley is. And I think Rhea Ripley's attractive. I just think that she does a lot of stuff to herself, and then her embarrassing display of not giving Hogan tribute it's not cool. It's not cool.